This is actually a Chinese skull from a medical specimen. So you can see the difference between this.
Oh yeah.
We're talking this brow ridge and nose here.
For nearly 50 years, the Terracotta Army stood as a monument to ancient China's imperial glory. Thousands of life-sized warriors buried in silence, guarding the tomb of the first emperor. But now that silence is breaking. Look at the scale of this place. Tells you a lot about the guy. These warriors are set for battle, exactly like the emperor's real army. Using advanced decoding methods, researchers have begun to uncover the truth behind the strange inscriptions etched into the soldiers' armor, skin, and even their hollow torsos. We found amazing archaeological objects, and the implications are enormous for archaeology. It's going to be truly revolutionary. What they're finding is not what anyone expected. These markings, once thought to be simple or meaningless, are revealing something far more complex. Some experts believe they were never meant to be read. Others say they were warnings. Whatever their purpose, one thing is now certain. Once the messages started to make sense, the story of the Terracotta Army changed forever. History and discovery. In 1974, a group of farmers digging a well in Lining County near Xi'an in central China made an unexpected discovery. As they broke into the hard earth, they uncovered pieces of clay figures. At first, they assumed the fragments were part of an old kiln or common burial item. But when archaeologists were alerted and began examining the site, it became clear that this was no ordinary find. What the farmers had found was the edge of one of the most important archaeological sites in the world. The excavation quickly expanded under the control of Chinese authorities. What emerged from the ground stunned experts. Feeling he's discovered something important, Yang takes it back to the village, but everyone is terrified to touch it. Thousands of life-sized clay warriors, each with individual facial features, hairstyles, and expressions, stood buried in rows. They were arranged in full battle formation, complete with horses, chariots, and weapons. Over time, more than 8,000 soldiers, 130 chariots, and 670 horses were identified. They were not part of a battlefield, but a constructed army meant to guard something or someone very important. This army was built to accompany the first emperor of China, Qin Shi Huang, into the afterlife. Qin Huang is literally the first emperor in China. He established the Qin dynasty in the year 221 BC. Qin Shi Huang was the ruler who unified China for the first time in 221 BCE. After achieving control over the warring states, he launched a series of massive construction projects, including roads, canals, and the early form of the Great Wall. His mausoleum was the largest and most ambitious of all. The Terracotta Army was built just outside his main burial mound, standing as a protective force for his tomb. The scale and detail of the army surprised archaeologists. By the time of the first emperor, it was clear that you couldn't literally slay an entire regiment of an army. Each warrior was handcrafted. No two were exactly alike. There were soldiers of different ranks, each represented with appropriate armor, hairstyles, and body language. Some appeared calm, others looked stern. Some had mustaches, while others were clean-shaven. The artisans even gave the warriors varied body types and hand positions. It was clear that this was not just a mass-produced set of statues. Significant thought and effort went into making the army appear lifelike. Weapons were also discovered among the statues. Bronze swords, spears, and crossbows were buried with the warriors. The Qin led them into a trap and then attacked with their devastating archers. Applause, music, some of the weapons were still sharp thanks to advanced metal preservation techniques used at the time. This showed that the army was not just symbolic. It was designed to function as a real military unit in the afterlife. The emperor's tomb located nearby has not yet been opened. Ancient texts claim it contains rivers of mercury, mechanical traps, and a full model of his empire. Out of concern for preservation and safety, archaeologists have avoided opening the main tomb. So far, they have focused on the surrounding pits where the army stands. The discovery of the Terracotta Army changed what historians knew about ancient China's power, organization, and belief in the afterlife. But one part of the site drew quiet curiosity from the beginning. Some of the statues had unusual markings, tiny inscriptions placed in hidden areas. At first, these were ignored, but as more were found, their presence became harder to dismiss. That mystery would become the focus of the next phase of investigation. The mysterious inscriptions. Soon after the Terracotta Army was uncovered, archaeologists began noticing small carved marks on some of the statues. These marks were not large or decorative. They were small, often hidden on the backs of armor plates, inside limbs, under feet, or even inside hollow torsos. At first, they seemed unimportant. Some researchers believed they were simple workshop stamps used to identify craftsmen or production units. Others thought they were inventory marks or part of a numbering system for organizing the massive construction effort. However, not all the inscriptions fit these explanations. Some of the marks did not match known Chinese characters from the Qin dynasty. A few symbols were irregular or seemed to appear only once across the entire site. Some were scratched in odd places that could not be seen without breaking the statues apart. This made them difficult to study, and for years they received little attention. Have gradually revealed the tiny clues that the Terracotta Army originally looked very different to what we see today. Most archaeologists focused on the visible elements of the site, the layout, the artistic details, and the connection to the emperor's tomb. The mystery deepened when researchers noticed that some statues with inscriptions appeared to follow no pattern at all. In many cases, soldiers standing next to each other had entirely different sets of markings. Some figures had multiple marks while others had none. In certain pits, inscriptions seemed to cluster in strange ways, suggesting an intentional design that no one could yet understand. Attempts to categorize the symbols led to further confusion. Some marks were clearly written in standard Qin seal script, which was the official written form used by the government. These were easier to translate and usually referred to workshops or names of foremen. But other marks were either distorted versions of known characters or completely unrecognizable. Some experts questioned whether they were characters at all. In the 1990s, a few scholars began raising concerns in internal reports. They suggested that at least some of the inscriptions might carry meanings that were not administrative. One report raised the possibility that the symbols reflected ceremonial instructions or coded language. However, these ideas were not widely accepted, and the reports remained unpublished. Part of the problem was access. Not all statues were open to full examination, and many that contained interior markings had to remain sealed to preserve their structure. Researchers were not allowed to dismantle statues to study their inner surfaces unless the statues were already damaged or undergoing restoration. As a result, knowledge about these inscriptions remained limited for decades. Even though the marks were rarely discussed publicly, they remained in the background of the Terracotta Army research. Some experts referred to them casually as anomalies. Others quietly collected photographs and transcriptions for later study. Still, there was no full explanation. The marks were clearly real, but their purpose, meaning, and placement remained unknown. That uncertainty gave rise to something shocking. People began to suggest that the inscriptions were never meant to be understood in the first place. Suppressed theories. As questions around the strange inscriptions grew, a few researchers began to propose disturbing theories that were never officially accepted or fully investigated. These theories suggested that the inscriptions were not just records of names or workshop codes, but were written with a very different purpose. One connected to ritual control, spiritual confinement, and possibly even curse-based burial practices. These ideas were quietly shared, sometimes submitted for review, but never made it into public academic records. While unverified, they are still discussed in private circles and remain part of the larger mystery. The first and most widely whispered theory came from a linguist working with a regional archaeological team. According to individuals familiar with the project, this researcher believed that the markings followed a phonetic sequence similar to a chant or a spoken ritual. He allegedly claimed that several repeated symbol patterns resembled old oral codes used in burial rites meant to seal souls inside specific objects. The suggestion was that these marks were not meant to be read silently, but to be recited aloud in a ritual setting during burial. The goal, according to the theory, was to bind the spirits of the dead to the clay figures, forcing them to stand eternal guard for the emperor in the afterlife. Another theory, also never published, came from a visiting scholar who specialized in early Toisterary texts. He believed the symbols were part of a spirit-restraining formula intended to prevent the dead from returning or seeking revenge. He claimed that one particular pattern found only on statues of officers and generals closely matched a structure found in a rare ritual manuscript used to lock restless souls to specific objects. According to second-hand accounts, his working theory was that the Terracotta Army did not just represent soldiers, but actually served as vessels to trap the souls of condemned men, possibly the very workers who died building them. A third and more extreme theory which circulated only in private communication suggested that the inscriptions were directional spells written in a specific sequence across different pits. The idea was that each pit functioned as part of a larger design with specific incantations encoded across statues to maintain control over something buried deeper, possibly within the emperor's sealed tomb. These life-sized statues of foot soldiers, generals, even horses represent the faces of the emperor's actual army. While this theory had no physical evidence, some claimed the repeating symbols across pits pointed to a larger pattern meant to be read spatially, not just line by line. None of these theories have been confirmed. The individuals involved either abandoned the topic or declined to speak publicly. However, each theory shared one disturbing idea that the inscriptions were not meant to inform, but to control, contain, or silence. Whether these interpretations were ever officially reviewed is unclear, but those who pursued them seemed to stop without warning and never return to the subject again. For years, these theories were buried, discussed quietly, and left without further exploration. But now, AI has finally decoded the real shocking truth behind the inscriptions. But before the breakthroughs, there were rumors of people who tried to physically prove what these inscriptions meant. And according to those who remember, the consequences were strange, unsettling, and in some cases, deeply alarming. Rumored attempts that went too far. Before artificial intelligence and modern scanning techniques brought new attention to the Terracotta Army inscriptions, there were rumors of earlier efforts to uncover their meanings using direct physical methods. We knew very little about the Qin Empire until the Terracotta Army was uncovered. These alleged attempts are not officially recorded, but they have circulated among researchers, museum staff, and former assistants who worked near the site. While unverified, the stories raise questions about what may have been discovered and why those efforts suddenly stopped. One widely shared account describes a team based in Xi'an during the early 1980s that allegedly tried to open several damaged statues to examine hidden inscriptions inside the torsos. According to a former lab assistant, the group believed that internal markings out of view from the surface might hold more complete or secret information. The project was said to have ended suddenly after several people resigned or fell ill under unexplained circumstances. No reports were ever made public, and the tools and statues involved were reportedly removed from the storage area shortly after. Another rumor involves a small university research group in the late 1990s that supposedly used acoustic scanning to test for internal marks without damaging the statues. One researcher later posted then deleted a message in an academic forum claiming that they had found unusual echo patterns suggesting hidden chambers inside certain figures. He also claimed that some of the markings were intentionally placed in areas where light or tools could not reach. The project was never publicly continued. A third and more controversial story centers on a foreign cryptography team that visited Xi'an in the early 2000s. The group reportedly used frequency analysis to examine repeating symbols. According to those familiar with their notes, they believed one sequence translated to buried alive for eternity. Not long after, they were asked to leave the country. Officially, this was due to a visa issue, but the timing led to speculation that they had uncovered something sensitive. These rumored events were never confirmed by any institution or official source. Still, the consistency with which these stories reappear, especially among those close to the field, has led some to believe that attempts were made and that something may have been found. Whatever the truth, these early efforts created an atmosphere of caution and mystery. When technology returned to the inscriptions years later, it would do so in a much more advanced way and with far more unsettling results. Breakthrough decoding techniques. For decades, the strange inscriptions on the Terracotta Army were difficult to study. Many of them were located in hidden areas such as under armor plates or inside the torsos of hollow statues. Others were faded, damaged, or obscured by soil and age. That was really fascinating part of my archaeological career. Earlier researchers lacked the tools to study these markings in detail without risking damage to the statues. That changed with the arrival of advanced imaging and decoding technologies. The first major breakthrough came through the use of multispectral imaging, a method that captures surface details across a range of light wavelengths beyond what the human eye can see. By applying this to sections of the army, researchers were able to detect faded or invisible marks that had gone unnoticed for years. Some of these marks appeared on surfaces that looked blank under normal lighting, revealing symbols that had been lost to time. This is a very new technique. Now, the challenge for archaeologists for capturing 3D data has always been that it's expensive, that it involves complicated equipment. Infrared scanning and 3D laser mapping were also used to create high-resolution digital models of the statues. These models allowed experts to examine every angle of a figure without physically handling it. In many cases, this led to the discovery of shallow carvings in recessed or hard-to-access areas. These tools made it possible to catalog and compare inscriptions across hundreds of warriors with a level of precision that was never before possible. It's a vast pottery army which is slowly being unearthed from the tomb where it's lain for more than 2,000 years. The most significant step forward came when researchers began applying machine learning and pattern recognition tools to the growing database of inscriptions. These models were trained using known examples of Qin seal script along with earlier character forms from regional tombs and administrative records. As the system processed more inscriptions, it began to detect structural patterns such as repeated symbol clusters, specific spatial arrangements, and likely separators between character groups. Teams from multiple countries contributed to this process, combining their findings to build a shared database of recorded inscriptions. Of course, what he didn't know was that this was actually the most important archaeological finding in China of the last 100 red years. The scale of the effort allowed researchers to organize and analyze the symbols by figure type, pit location, and statue orientation. The hope was to determine whether the inscriptions followed a consistent structure or were purely individual. For the first time, researchers were able to go beyond simply documenting the inscriptions. These tools made it possible to begin interpreting them. The focus now shifted from identifying the symbols to understanding what they actually meant and what they might reveal about the people who created them. The disturbing messages revealed. Once the inscriptions were digitally reconstructed and processed through translation models, researchers began to receive their first full interpretations. The results were not what they expected. When the dust is settled from this excavation, archaeologists discover more than 8,000 of these terracotta statues. Instead of administrative codes or ceremonial names, several inscriptions appeared to contain messages that were emotional, personal, and deeply unsettling. Some seemed to be written by those who worked on the statues. Others appeared to be formal statements. In both cases, the tone was not reverent. It was fearful. One phrase was found repeated in several locations, always inside the torso or beneath the armor plate of a warrior statue. The translation was simple, constructed by suffering. It was not part of a name or a workshop mark. There was no indication that it was meant to be seen. It was hidden. Another message was found on a figure believed to represent a high-ranking officer. Inside its chest cavity, carved in smaller characters, was the phrase, "He took my name and burned it in stone." Researchers debated whether this was a symbolic phrase or a literal statement by a worker. We found amazing archaeological objects. So I think we cannot guess what buried beneath in the hotel tomb complex. Either way, it did not resemble any formal inscription from known Qin texts. Other messages were even more direct. On a broken statue found near the edge of Pit 2, a vertical string of characters was discovered beneath the left arm. The translation was, "Here lies death and those who served it." It was followed by an unreadable cluster of markings that could not be decoded due to damage. The most debated message was found inside the foot of one of the kneeling archers, hidden in a place almost impossible to see without scanning. The inscription read, "I worked until my hands broke. Let him walk over me forever." It was interpreted by some as a sign of forced labor. Others believed it could have been written by someone who viewed their work as a sacrifice. Either way, it carried a sense of loss and submission. These decoded phrases shocked those involved in the project. The inscriptions were not neutral. They reflected pain, possibly even resistance or punishment. While the full context of these messages is still debated, their tone was clear. They were not written for honor or memory. They were written to be hidden. And now that they have been uncovered, the attention has shifted to the people behind them and what their lives might have actually looked like. So far, only a small part of this information has been made public. Most of it continues to circulate quietly among those closest to the research, but the interpretations are beginning to leak out piece by piece, and the full impact of what they reveal may only just be starting. Historical and human implications. The construction of the Terracotta Army was only one part of a much larger effort ordered by China's first emperor, Qin Shi Huang. Qin Huang is literally the first emperor in China. His reign was marked by large-scale projects that reshaped the country. These included the early stages of the Great Wall, a vast national road network, a unified system of weights and measures, and most notably, his massive underground mausoleum. To complete these projects, the emperor relied on a labor force made up of soldiers, convicts, conscripted peasants, and prisoners of war. Modern scholars estimate that these projects required the work of hundreds of thousands of people, many of whom did not survive. Historical records from the Han Dynasty, especially the records of the grand historian written by Sima Xi'an, describe the severe conditions faced by laborers. Workers were forced to dig deep into the mountains, transport heavy materials, and carve statues under constant pressure. The records mention brutal punishments, including beatings, forced labor sentences, and in some cases, execution for minor mistakes or attempts to escape. Simeon also claimed that workers who helped build the emperor's tomb were buried alive to prevent them from revealing its secrets. The secret of this rammed earth construction is to build it up in small layers. While this claim remains unconfirmed archaeologically, it has become one of the most discussed aspects of the emperor's legacy. In recent years, some scholars have re-examined these historical accounts alongside the physical evidence at the Terracotta Army site. Although no mass graves have been officially uncovered near the pits, some fragments of human remains have been found in the area, raising questions about who may have been buried alongside the clay warriors. Others point to the lack of identifying marks on most of the statues as further evidence that the workers were never meant to be remembered. If the recently decoded inscriptions are accurate, they may offer something that has never existed before. First-person messages from the people who built the army. While their full meaning is still debated, even the possibility that these messages reflect real experiences of the laborers has started a wider conversation. Some experts now argue that the Terracotta Army should be treated not just as an archaeological site, but as a massive grave marker for the anonymous dead, whose lives were used to create it. This discussion has also raised ethical questions about how the site is presented to the public. The Terracotta Army is one of China's most popular tourist destinations and a symbol of national pride. But with new questions about who may have paid the price for its creation, some believe the site should also include a formal memorial or recognition of the laborers. The Terracotta Army was once viewed only as a symbol of imperial power. Now it is becoming something more complex. It may also stand as a reminder of the lives lost to build an emperor's vision. Lives that may finally be speaking, not through official records, but through the clay they left behind. The emperor's legacy and the silence that remains. Public memory of Qin Shi Huang has always been divided. On one hand, he is remembered as the leader who unified China, standardized its writing, currency, and measurements, and established a centralized legal system. On the other, his rule was marked by strict control, book burnings, mass executions, and large-scale forced labor. For years, his tomb and the Terracotta Army have been presented primarily as achievements, symbols of progress, vision, and unshakable authority. Now, that image is being questioned. As more information surfaces about the inscriptions, discussions around the emperor's legacy could begin to shift. The focus might no longer only be on what he built, but how it was built and at what human cost. Scholars might start to ask whether Qin Shi Huang's accomplishments can still be viewed in isolation from the suffering that may have fueled them. Some museum professionals and cultural historians believe the Terracotta Army should be reinterpreted to include the laborer's perspective. Others argue that any suggestion of mass suffering remains speculative and risks weakening national heritage. Meanwhile, the emperor's actual tomb remains sealed. Archaeologists continue to cite high mercury levels and preservation risks as reasons not to excavate. Still, those working near the site have quietly noted new findings along the tomb's perimeter, including warning inscriptions and unusual architectural designs that seem to serve no clear structural function. These discoveries have not been shared in public exhibitions, but some believe they may hold even more information about the system of control Qin Shi Huang built not just in life, but in death. For decades, the Terracotta Army stood as a monument to power. But now, as attention shifts toward the hidden messages within the site, a disturbing truth has been uncovered, one that may permanently alter how the world views the man buried beneath it. The silence around him is no longer intact. What comes next may depend on whether anyone dares to open the last door he left closed. What do you think about this discovery? Feel free to share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Want more videos like this? Then subscribe to the channel for more eye-opening stories. Thank you so much for staying with us till the end. See you in the next video.